Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 986 just came out, and the war has officially started. I've personally been loving this last stretch of 4 to 5 chapters, and this chapter was no different. I think it's just going to keep getting better and better from here, basically now that things have kicked off. And if you want to hear my thoughts on, where things are going to go from here, how this chapter ended, you can skip around. There's timestamps below, there's chapter stamps throughout the video, but I'm going to start from the beginning with the scene with the Scabbards in the snow. So I thought that this was a very well-directed chapter overall, and it definitely started from the top with the Kinemon and Dendro running into the rest of the Scabbards, Kanjuro's dead body and such scene. The Kanjuro dead body, okay, so Orochi is dead, Kanjuro is dead, but I don't know, call me crazy, but I'm starting to think that these guys might not actually be dead, I don't know if Oda's just cutting off the whole Kurozumi plotline right here, especially because I don't know, Orochi has the Yamata no Orochi fruit, and Kanjuro has God knows what the full extent of his abilities are. Like, I've seen people say that, oh, he can't fake this because this is how the ink clones work, or that's how the ink clones work. Like, guys, we don't know yet how the ink clones work, right? We don't know the full extent of what he can do. Like, so far he'd been drawing with his left hand, now when he draws with his right hand, he can draw 10 times better. Maybe he's ambidextrous, and when he draws with both hands, he unlocks a whole new level of abilities. God knows what he can do, right? So, Kanjuro, I wouldn't write him off just yet. I would personally feel very disappointed if this is the way that Kanjuro's storyline ends, because he was turning into such a potentially really interesting villain for the Wano arc, and potentially for all of One Piece in general, especially with the ability that he has. Like, I admit I'm a little biased towards him because of the ability he had. Like, if Raizo had turned out to be the traitor, and then, this was the end of Raizo or something, I'd be like, okay, that was enough of him anyway. But with Kanjuro and what he has started to show us that he can do, I definitely want to see a lot more of him. So I don't yet buy that either Orochi or Kanjuro are dead, right? But if they are, then I think the whole Kurozumi plotlines that Oda set up earlier on, it'll take a reread for me to figure out exactly how I feel about all that, but at the moment I would be a little bit, I don't like how that all ended up going down, basically. It felt a little anticlimactic if that is how all of those little plot lines came in and just vanished from the story. The reason I didn't feel that as much with Orochi was because I thought it was a very, like last chapter, I thought it was a very exciting new direction that Oda was taking it if he just offed Orochi right there. Yeah, it killed some plot lines, but it almost felt like a fresh start for Wano. Whereas with Kanjuro, yeah, it kills off plot lines, but it also kills off like a very interesting plotline that it would have been continuing to go forward, which was like Kanjuro himself, like what's his character storyline set up to be. Like, I think we were all a little more interested in what was going to become of Kanjuro in the future and his abilities and his dynamic with the Scabbards, or even with Luffy potentially down the line, or Momonosuke, etc. So Kanjuro, I think, was a more interesting prospect, so seeing him killed off along with Orochi potentially being killed off, I don't know how I feel about that just yet. But at the end of the day, I don't think either of them are dead, so it doesn't really matter. Now, the Scabbards scene in general, I did think that this was a very well-directed scene, as I started to say earlier. Them walking between the two rows of Scabbards while it's snowing and everything like that, I thought that was, a very artistically done scene. And in general, this whole chapter was, pretty cinematically done. I would say that this is, I don't know, maybe you guys can tell me in the comments below, but I don't feel that much for the Scabbards as a group. I like a lot of the Scabbards individually. This is something I've touched upon in past reviews. I like the Scabbards individually, but maybe it's partly because we've seen them all together, only just recently in the Oden flashback and such. It was more so Oden-centric. It was a very fast-paced flashback, so we didn't actually get to spend much time with the Scabbards as a group. Seeing them, like the quick little flashback scene we got to see of all of them together, like, we didn't really get much of that in the Oden flashback itself, right? So I'm gonna have a hard time feeling that sort of like endearment to, like, the Scabbards, or sorry, the other way, right? The Scabbards aren't that endeared to me as a group so far. I don't know if there's like time to change that, but I think we're basically at the point where, things are kicking off. I don't think that I'm going to feel that much more strongly about the Scabbards as a group in the next couple chapters, but we'll see. I will say that I think that Oda has succeeded in getting across the idea of the Scabbards, which is that they are meant to feel like Oden's crew, right? I've been talking about the parallels between the Straw Hat crew and the Straw Hats, Oden and the Scabbards. I think Oda's successfully gotten across that idea that the Scabbards were at one point a Straw Hat-esque Straw Hat-esque group, right? Like, that's the way we're supposed to picture them, and that's the context we're supposed to view everything that they're doing right now. I think that concept has been communicated to the reader well. I just don't feel it. Like, I don't feel like I'm reading about this, like, a group that I care about to, like, anywhere near the degree of the Straw Hats, and that's just because, they're a big group. It's 9 characters that, like, we got very little time as a group to spend with, right? So it's hard to actually get a sort of sentimental feeling towards them as a whole for me so far, right? I think at the same time we can all expect now that, it's very, very possible that this whole group ends up getting just offed, because this is the 2nd or 3rd time that they've talked about, death, right? And that's the biggest death flag that characters can have in a series, is when they start talking about how we're not going to make it back, or we're prepared to die, etc., right? So, and I think Oda does like to frame things sort of in a way, like with Pedro, when Pedro died, Oda made it clear that Pedro was always ready to make that journey to Whole Cake Island, his final journey. Same with Whitebeard. Ace probably didn't want to go at the very end of that, but Ace was the exception, right? So Whitebeard, Pedro, we don't talk about... I'll touch on Pound for a second, okay? This was a funny cover page to me. It was a funny cover page. It doesn't excuse, in my mind, what Oda did with Pound, but I thought it was a really funny cover page. Like, I don't know what to say. I thought that the cover story, the way it ended, was, if we assume that this is the end, maybe it's not, but I thought it was a fine way to end this cover story. I thought it was just funny. Anyway, that aside, I still hate what he did with Pound. But, the point being, right, I think that when Oda wants a character to die, Oda can't bring it in his heart to just kill off a character that doesn't really want to die or isn't really prepared to die, so he frames it a little bit beforehand going in. Like, Whitebeard's like, this was always going to be my final thing. Pedro's like, okay, I only got like 5 years left on my lifespan or something like that, so this is going to be my final thing. Like, the Scabbards too, I think they've all been living for this moment. And even the mentality that they go forward with, the Tsunachi type thing, which I'll talk more about at the end of the chapter, that speaks to that as well. Like, they're always prepared to just throw away their lives and be able to follow through with what they believe that they're supposed to do, right? So the whole Scabbards scene that happened, I think that hopefully, like, if there is a death scene coming up, hopefully Oda is able to stir up some emotion for them at that point, at least for me. And, that's something that he is actually very, very good at doing. Like, if we go back to Pound as the example, and this is one of the reasons I'm so upset with the Pound situation, I think that Oda did a great example, taking a great feat, taking a character that I cared very little about up till that point in the arc, and then all of a sudden giving him, like, a lot of characterization in one very quick chapter and making me actually feel something right before he died, right? So the Scabbards, hopefully, like, I don't feel that strongly about them as a group so far, but we've been with them for so long. I'm sure that if a death scene were to come around for all of them, or at least some of them, that Oda has something really good in mind to be able to bring out that emotion when the time comes, pretty much. The caveat I'd say is that I think it's harder to do it with a large group, unless you do it one at a time and devote, several, like a half chapter to this one, half chapter to that one. I don't think Oda's going to take the time to do that, like if you were to kill off all 9 Scabbards. So, it's just harder to feel something for 9K. Like, people, like, as humans, people tend to connect more with individual storylines and latching onto a single character, or like a single, stepping into one person's shoes at a time. Anyway, enough about the Scabbards. The big scene was the Kaido scene, right? Or him at the podium or whatever, or the stage, and getting ready to execute Momonosuke. This was Momonosuke's chapter, right? This was Momonosuke's chapter. I think it was a very good moment for him, probably the best moment he's had so far in the series, easily. I won't go so far as to say it was a great, like iconic moment in my mind. And like, keep in mind, I'm not trying to knock the moment. Like, when I say iconic, I'm saying like, I don't think this is like I Want to Live or something like that. That's what I'm saying, right? But I thought it was a really good moment, and definitely for a character that many people don't care that much for, I think this was a much needed moment to hopefully start swinging some people over. I haven't disliked Momonosuke in a long time. I just haven't liked him, if that makes sense. Like, the dislike went away, I think, around Zou, when he first had his scene where he was telling Luffy, you know, I'm small, I can't do what I want to be able to do, that's why I need to ask for help, but I'm ready to fight and give it my all, etc. I think that was a good scene for him. He's had several small good moments. The prison scene, the, the kidnapping scene with Kanjuro, then actually while he was kidnapped with Kanjuro, what he was trying to do. And I think this was where it really paid off the most, where we kind of hopefully will see a new Momonosuke for this arc going forward. I will say that we're also getting a general idea of what Kaido values through this chapter. We've been getting that so far, right? Like, we do get the idea that Kaido has certain respect for displays of character or strength or whatever. So again, we see this with how he treated the samurai. Now we get an official name for, by the way, the head of, I'm not even going to try and pronounce the word. You guys know what I'm talking about. Orochi's Samurai Squad. We got a name for the head of Orochi's Samurai Squad. And of course, Fukurokuju, of course, he's gonna swap sides right away. He's done this before. He's been through this before. He's swapped over from Oden to Orochi. He's gone through this, right? So, no surprises there. So obviously Kaido's forces just got a boost. I am interested to see who those two guys will be matched up against down the line, because, the rest of Fukurokuju's Oniwa Banshu, they have not been formidable whatsoever. I assume that Fukurokuju will be. But obviously that stuff happened. So I like the fact that Kaido gave them this option of basically like, you can live and you'll have my respect. Or sorry, you can live or you can, choose to die here and then you'll have my respect, right? So live or respect. Obviously most people were like, okay, well, we can do without your respect. We're just going to live. It makes sense, but it's interesting to see that, like, this is how Kaido sort of values things, right? Like, the people who don't choose to go along with him and don't choose to just submit, he respects those people more. Obviously, he'd prefer it if people just joined his side, but he respects people who don't just bow down to him. And that's interesting because his entire crew so far seems to be made up of people that have chosen to bow down to him, and they all had aspirations at some point, right? Like, we've even seen that, like, even the lowest gifters they all say that they wanted to be Pirate King at some point. That's what they told Zoro a couple chapters back. And, like, his entire Beast Pirate hierarchy is based around people who had big aspirations, and then he broke them and then made them work for him, right? So the fact that he probably doesn't respect a single person in his entire crew is kind of funny to me. But I like the fact that he gave them a choice, and then he also gave Momonosuke a choice. So Kaido likes giving people choices. I don't know, that's interesting. Maybe it's going to be a trend that keeps going forward, but we'll see. I like the fact that, like, he's putting your life versus respect. That's kind of the same thing that happened with Momonosuke here. I'm a little sad that we didn't get to see his reaction to Momo's, declaration that, I'm going to be the Shogun of Wano someday. Not today. This is Shogun of Wano someday. My name's Momonosuke. He didn't back down. I wanted to see Kaido's reaction to that. I guess that's going to be saved for a little bit the next time that they're face to face again, and we'll see what Kaido's new opinion of Momo is. But at the moment, that's being left a little unclear. But the main thing, of course, was Momo himself. I thought that the lead up to the moment that Momo made that declaration was pretty well done. Again, well-directed chapter. I do think that we did get a good sense of everything sort of converging at one time. So we're cutting away to lots of characters, but we're actually seeing them all head towards the same location, right? So it is a good sort of build up towards the war kicking off. And the war really kicked off, I think, with Momo's declaration. So in the lead into that moment, cutting to everybody, cutting to Usopp, cutting to Zoro, Law, Kid, etc., them all converging at the same time, and then going into Momo having his flashbacks and stuff like that. I think that did set the stage for the moment pretty well, built up tension, etc. And then just, Momo's flashbacks, I thought they were good. It was quick, but obviously I think that there's more for Momo down the line. And then his declaration, of course, I think that this is the most brave thing that his character has had to do up till this point by far. Like when he was being kidnapped by Kanjuro, he didn't necessarily know that he was gonna die. This is him basically saying that, like, do or die, I'm not giving up on who I am and what I know I need to be, basically. So that's Luffy's influence coming in, that's his father's influence, that's Toki's influence, all good stuff. I am starting to come around to like his character more. I think we're gonna just need to see more of him, basically, but hopefully there's a new Momonosuke that comes out from these last few chapters, basically. Like, the entire incident starting with him being kidnapped by Kanjuro up till now, right? And then the last thing is the Scabbards arrived. The Scabbards arriving was, I'll say, the last panel. I thought the last panel where they're all just jumping Kaido and literally falling off, like they're falling off the stage. The chapter ends with like a literal cliffhanger, right? I thought that was pretty cool. When Izzo shot the sword out of King's hand, I was like a little thrown by that. I was like, Izzo's like a low-level commander of the Whitebeard pirates, you know, like a really extremely unremarkable member of the Whitebeard pirates, at least throughout all of Marineford War, and then here Izzo is shooting the sword out of King's hand, so a little surprised by that. And then I was just totally surprised to see Kaido's club getting knocked out of his hand by Nekomamushi, but, you know, element of surprise or whatever, chalk it up to that, and I'll just ignore it and move on. But I was definitely a little thrown to see these guys being able to do that stuff. But anyway, the entire crew jumping Kaido, that actually reminded me a little bit of like what Blackbeard's crew did to Whitebeard, so I was like, alright, this isn't honorable in my mind. I generally don't like, large team efforts to take out one character. That's a personal bias. I view that almost always the same way I view, like, the Blackbeard pirates attacking Whitebeard. I'm like, this isn't even fair. It's just like one character versus all the heroes. I'm like, they're not heroes, they're cheaters. You see a gang jumping one guy, who's the bad guy in every situation? That's my personal bias. I'll leave that out of this as much as I can. I will say that generally in One Piece I preferred when it comes down to the 1v1 fight. Like, I was not feeling Luffy and Law versus Doflamingo whatsoever until it became just Luffy versus Doflamingo. But the panel itself was cool, right? The panel was cool of the entire 9 Scabbards, basically. It's good that they had Izzo in the backup squad, right? Like, away from the rest of the Scabbards, basically, because once the traitor was revealed, Oda still gets to keep the idea of the 9 Scabbards by just, like, swapping Izzo in. So we got to see the 9 Scabbards attacking Kaido. I don't think that this is going to do anything to him at all. And I do somewhat fear for the Scabbards starting with next chapter. But I don't think, if there is a death scene for them, I don't think it's going to happen right away next chapter. I think we are going to get a little further along. I think there's going to be some interference here, and I think that ultimately, if they do die, that it would be to Kaido, but I think it's going to be a little ways down the way before that happens. So the last thing I'll say is that, you know, this is chapter 986. Chapter 1000 is coming up around the corner pretty soon, so future predictions is basically, I'm looking back at Marineford, and you all know that I think that this raid on Onigashima is going to end in failure. I do think Oda is trying to time things up so that the act pretty much ends at around chapter 1000. Like, chapter 1000 itself might be the end of Wano Act 3, or it could just basically be like the climactic moment that we know that this is basically, this whole raid has just gone bad, and then, you know, a couple chapters down the line, the act ends. But my point being, basically, compared to Marineford, the main meat of what we remember as, like, the really hype, insane parts of Marineford happened between chapter 570 to 580. Okay, so that was probably the most insane 10-chapter run you'll ever find in One Piece, at least so far, and probably in any series ever, to be honest, because if you go back and read 570 to 580, it's just insane how many twists and emotions Oda packed into that series of 10 chapters. But the point being, things can go south really, really fast, because 570 started with actually Ace being freed. Maybe that's 571. It's around there, basically. Like, Ace is freed, they're all happy, then Ace dies, then Whitebeard dies, then Blackbeard comes in and gets the fruit, and just everything that happens in that stretch is a lot of, high point emotions, then going down really, really quick. So the way I see it, I would be very, very interested in seeing how what I predict to be basically a very similar stretch of chapters, basically 990 to chapter 1000 go, right? So we've still actually got a lot of storytelling left to do before we hit chapter 1000. So, we've got at least, a few more chapters, I would bet, of just the fight basically getting started. And then 990 to chapter 1000 would basically be where I think things would actually start hitting that sort of peak intensity, right? And I would guess that things would start to look good for the Alliance in a way. And then we get a series of back-to-back chapters similar to Marineford, where things go really, really, really bad. And then I would guess that, again, either Act 3 ends on chapter 1000, or we get a sort of climactic finishing point at chapter 1000, then maybe, after a couple chapters of cooldown action, we get to the end of Act 3. So, all that is to say that I'm very much looking forward to this next series of events. I do think that the Scabbards are very possibly going to be dying in, or at least several of them may be set to die in the next set, 13 chapters or so, pretty much. So that's all for this video. If you enjoyed, then definitely like, share, and subscribe. And you can support me on Patreon to help me keep making videos and get my Extended Thoughts podcast on all future videos. Link in the description below.